I want to eventually see a Pakistan where women, girls, people with money, people without money, anyone and their mothers can leave their house as and when they please, get around, not be worried about their safety, and not be worried about how they're going to pay for it. Number one roadblock that we have to education and to employment opportunities is how in the world am I going to get there? And that needs to be taken out of the equation, right? And half your population suddenly will have opportunities that they don't. I think if there's one thing that's going to change the fate of this nation, it's more entrepreneurs. And I don't just mean startups, right? I mean entrepreneurs of any kind. And I think we're starting to see a trend where there's more of that now. And I think that needs to continue to grow, and we'll be in a very different position.
Welcome to Venture Journey. So to begin, maybe we could start about you telling us about your early days.
Well, first of all, thank you for doing this, Mitz. We're very excited to be chatting with you. I grew up, I think, as a miniature adult. Grew up mostly in aircrafts, lived between multiple geographies. Had a great childhood, enjoyed myself thoroughly. I think I was surrounded by people who were full of love and full of grit, and that's sort of the upbringing that I had.
So what was your first job?
My first job, I actually worked on the radio.
Okay.
I was a terrible radio show host,
Right.
Probably the worst the world has ever seen, and that was probably my first job. I used to give tuitions in economics during school to make extra pocket money, started working odd jobs after that, eventually set up a business, and so on and so forth.
So now let's talk about Maha being in this startup world, in our ecosystem. So tell us about your affiliation and association with the startup ecosystem. When did you become part of a startup, and what is, like, from your vantage point, what is this ship of a startup? There are so many out there, but tell us about what is this life?
Mansoor, I'm a dinosaur. I have been in the startup ecosystem since 2013. My first spree was with Foodpanda.
Okay.
And us waqt we had 2G internet in this country. And what we used to do as a team is have menu books printed and sent to people's houses, where they were thrown through the gates, and we hoped that they would read off a menu book which had a Foodpanda logo on it, call us on a UAN number, and place an order with us. And really, that was the idea of technology at that point, right? And you look at where we are today, 10, 11 years later, and there's a world of difference. But I've been here since. I was then with Kareem, and since then have been in mobility. Post Kareem, I ended up at Swivel, and then started BusCaro. So tech and mobility both have pretty much been most of my adult life. And this is all I know.
Amazing. So now tell us about BusCaro. When did you start? What was the background? What was the idea? What did you see as a gap? And then how did you go about building BusCaro?
So there's no really idea point that came in, right? You have to understand that a day before that, I was the country GM for Swivel, a company that aimed to solve a very similar problem, right? In maybe a different business model, but they wanted people to be able to commute, right? They wanted safety for people, they wanted affordability for people. And so my job a day before BusCaro was pretty much the same as it's been ever since. And I think it was really unfortunate when Swivel had to sort of fold in Pakistan. And the day that happened, I was sure this is still the problem I want to be solving. And I initially fought at Swivel, and I said, I'm not shutting it down. Give me a little bit of money, we'll make it profitable, we'll grow it more sustainably. But we were a public company at that point, and so it really wasn't a decision that, the leadership team could make. And when that couldn't happen, I was meanwhile just getting reached out by customers of Swivel, and they didn't know what they do the next day. And I think, I didn't really think about it. There was no thought really put into it. I think I just, through WhatsApp, ended up putting a bus on the streets the next day, which became 2 buses and 3 buses and 4 buses. And, before we knew it, we're now a company that runs over 800 buses in Pakistan, right? And it wasn't this, thought through, I think this is a great idea, let me do this. I think even my team, a lot of them just showed up in my apartment the next morning just expecting, okay, this is what we're going to be doing, right? It'll just be under a different name, but this is the problem that we'll be chasing. And it just sort of happened.
So how did the name come about, BusCaro? I mean, it's appropriate, it's on spot. But how did that happen?
It was literally, I think it came from someone trying to say enough is enough. And somebody said, bus kar do. Because we were, doing our projections for the business. We were working on our unit economics as we're launching. Fuel prices are changing every day. We start over every day. And somebody just said, bus kar do. And then another colleague said, that should be what we're called. BusCaro should be the name of this company. And that was it.
So what was the year you started?
2022 summer.
2022 summer.
Yes.
And in 2022 summer, when you were starting BusCaro, what was your pitch to your investors? And maybe you can also give us some background of who have invested in the company. And what was the pitch? Like, what was the call?
So let's go back to that time first and,
Right.
and what was happening, right? I think you'd have to be insane to either be a part of this journey, as a colleague, as an investor, as really anything. We had just seen, I think, the worst times in Pakistan as far as the ecosystem goes.
Right.
Country was flooded. Funding had dried globally, especially in Pakistan. We've just seen some, major companies that have sort of been the darlings of the ecosystem, unfortunately, fold. And nobody was interested in investing, period, especially not in Pakistan and certainly not in mobility. And so I think I very quickly, within the first week, realized that I can't fundraise. I need to just not do that right now. I need to use whatever capital I have personally, and I need to build traction because nobody believes me when I tell them this can be a sustainable business. And they have no reason to believe me. It just hadn't been done before. And so that's what we did. We basically bootstrapped for the first 6 months, built a whole bunch of traction. By the time we got our first check-in, I think we'd launched our second city at that point in time.
Okay.
And we're operating, in Karachi and Lahore, just about to launch Islamabad, had sort of proven the economics, and that's when we really started to get funding. The pitch was crazy. The pitch was, nobody has done this with a lot of money, and we will do this with very little money, right? That was the pitch. And it was a very difficult pitch for anyone to buy into. I think what I realized, though, is the best people for us to talk to are people who are experts in this particular area.
Right.
And so some of our first investors weren't even regular angel investors, right? They were high net worth individuals who come from mobility, who could then operationally question me and say, okay, Maha, you sound nuts, but what does that really mean? How will you do it? What will the business model look like? What will supply pricing look like for that to happen? And so on and so forth. And I think that's what ultimately worked for us. Started to get people in who are ex-mobility, early mobility investors, founders of successful mobility companies, that sort of thing. And that was our first batch. And then we started to get even more traction. And then, came in other angel investors, VCs, so on and so forth. But it was a very gradual process. For us, it wasn't, we're out raising around, we're going to raise X millions of dollars in the next 2 weeks. We'll close it out and get on with it. It's just been, checks coming in here, there, and we take the money when we get it and we keep going.
So for a first-time viewer, somebody who doesn't know about BusCaro, how would you go about explaining what the business model is?
So we have 2 business models. One is B2B, which is self-explanatory. If you are a school, organization, place that employs people and you want to find a way for people to commute, that's a B2B service. We will take your data from you, we will run vehicles for you, we'll bill you at the end of the month, and that's that, right? The second is B2B2C, which is essentially my spin on a B2C model, where we're saying, individuals who belong to certain institutions or areas or housing societies, as we start to open specific areas up, anyone associated with that particular zone can then sign up and become a user for us, right? So that's essentially the same profile as a B2C user. It's just a different customer acquisition strategy, which then ensures better unit economics for us and more sustainability.
Right. So in terms of the solution that you're hosting, what does it take for you to sustain this hosting? So it would have drivers, bus owners, and what is the technology that you have in the middle that connects both these sides? So can you give a sense that how do you do the back end? Like who is engaged with you in terms of making sure your solution that you host gets...
Absolutely. So the first thing is we obviously go and we onboard a client, whether that's a B2B client or a partnership through B2B2C, and we start collecting user data, right? So now those users can go, they can sign up. And so there's a user app for these individuals. There's then a dashboard for the client, right? So if you're, for instance, a school, you can monitor every ride of every student who's coming in, the attendance through them, so on and so forth. If a bus or a car is running late, you have all of that tracking. What you owe us, the financial visibility, so on and so forth. And that's your dashboard. The user, in this case, is using this to get his or her subscriptions, top up, know when the bus is arriving, know which routes this person wants to book, so on and so forth. Then there's, of course, the main technology, which is really what we use, right? Which is where we drive all our efficiency from. And then there is the captain side app, which these individual drivers are using. That gives them all of their tracking. They know where to go, so on and so forth. And so that's essentially sort of the nutshell of what's happening there. Operationally, what ends up happening is what we're really promising people is safety and security. A third of our clients today are actually minors and their children. Right? So we have the responsibility of ensuring that people's children are safe with us. And so there's now a parent app that's being built. So if you have an 8-year-old that's commuting with us, you can still track that ride. You know everything that's happening as a parent. Operationally, we have a security agency that we work with, which is responsible for all our background checks on drivers, so on and so forth. In case there's any emergency, there's an emergency response team that's present. We obviously have insurance providers that we have to work with. We operationally have to acquire these vehicles, do inspections on them, bring in these drivers who will be driving with us, get them trained, on behavior, on how to use the tech, all of that. And then they start running those routes, which we're monitoring through all our systems and ensuring that these vehicles are, reaching on time every day. We've done about 11.5 million bookings up until this point, and we've had over a 99% reliability. Sort of our vehicles show up on time for people every day, and we've managed to ensure that and are very proud of that.
Amazing. So can you also set the market for us, and what is the competition? When I'm talking about the market, like what's the addressable market size, and what is the competition right now?
No one and everyone. Right. So let's break this down. When we talk about B2B2C users or just any individual user who wants to commute with us, whose organization doesn't fund it, we are then competing with rickshaws. We are competing with ride hailing. In the case of male users, we're competing with bikes. We're competing with your local sort of van wala who will, you can walk to the end of a street, find this vehicle, he'll take you. That's the entire sort of ecosystem that you're really competing with when it comes to individual users. Now, does anyone do exactly what we do? No, right? And so there's no direct competition in that sense. But our users are people who otherwise use ride-hailing. We try to solve the same problem. We do it at about 25% of the cost. We compete with rickshaws. We cost about a third of that. We compete with bike users. So when I started BusCaro, I thought women would use us. What I've learned is that men use us just as much, right? Which has been something that was very interesting to me, right? Because I'm like, okay, you can also get on a bike. But what's happened is I think just as fuel prices have continued to go up, it's become a lot cheaper to travel in a high capacity vehicle, and all other forms of commute have continued to become more expensive, right? And so every assumption we had when we started this business 2.5 years ago has gone out the door. And market size has completely multiplied. Those segments have completely changed. And now you have men, women, anyone who's looking for affordable, safe commute. Those end up becoming, potential users for us. Now we've opened up this entirely new segment of children, right? And we're doing a lot of work with schools. Now there's legal requirements in Punjab, as an example, that schools have to have at least 50% of their student base travel in high capacity vehicles by next year. Or actually now this year, I forget, we're in 2025, as a way to reduce the smog, right? And so you have all of these new segments that are opening up at this point in time.
And since we were talking about, opening up, when Swivel happened, there was another company, I'm forgetting the name. Airlift, exactly. So it just seemed like it's going to be a big business and things will get organized. What do you think happened? I mean, you as an insider, you can give us.
So first of all, I think that market size, there's no doubt about. It is a huge market size, right? I think there's no question on that. I think that it's a question of how something is to be built, right? And we lived in very different times when Airlift came in, right? If I was the founder of Airlift 5 years ago, I would have made very different decisions than I make today when it's impossible for me to raise funding, right? Just very, very different times. I think expectations of startups were very different. We were, as an ecosystem, looking for a $1 billion exit. We were looking to build a unicorn, right? When you're looking to build a unicorn, and you're looking to compete with another company looking to build a unicorn, and both of you have a lot of money to burn, God knows you'll burn it, right? And at that time, I think that is what everyone expected of those companies. And they were both growing. There's no doubt about that. But I think when we talk about the time that mobility was done, and this isn't a dig at Airlift, I was at Swivel and we were making the same mistakes. I think that sanity completely went out the door at some point, right? I today, many years later, get a vehicle for about a third of the price that we, as an ecosystem, were getting one for back then, right? After all this inflation and all these years, it's a third of the price. And it's not because I underpay, it's because market conditions are different, right? And supply prices drove up because Swivel overpaid, so Airlift overpaid, so they further overpaid, and it was a price war.
Got it.
I think on the customer end, what I now very strongly believe is that this is the most subsidized form of transportation there is. If I'm acquiring you as a user and I'm not giving you any subsidy, this will cost you a fraction of anything you will pay otherwise. Why do I need to further discount, right? Why can't I charge you 150 rupees? Why do I need to charge you 20 rupees? Your alternative is 600-700 rupees. And I think that's something that as an ecosystem, all of us had missed. And I think there was a lot of subsidizing going on, right? And when you do those two things on both ends, unit economics can never make sense. And that's not judgment on the business model. That's just a question of how, everyone is strategizing about going about it. And so I think there was just this huge delta in terms of any sane unit economics that we saw across the board. Now, to be fair to both of these companies, Uber has subsidized, Careem has done it, everyone has done it, and everyone has had a much longer time period to make it to the other side, right? Whether it's an Amazon, it's an Uber, it's a Careem. These companies did not get that chance, right? Airlift, I think, just wasn't even a year in when the pandemic hit. They pivoted. And then obviously they were in a very different business, which I don't think I'm the right person to comment on. With Swivel, again, we saw just that it didn't get many years. Swivel had 1 year pre-pandemic. It had 1 year post-pandemic. I think they made great strides in that time. And unfortunately just weren't given enough time to, get to profitability, which I think they would have. And I think I've got on a bit of a rant here, but I think it's very easy to look back and talk about the mistakes that were made. But I don't think founders had many other options at that time. I think if you were a sustainable business growing at 10, 15, 20, 30% month on month, nobody was going to write you a check 5 years ago. And so I think everybody did what they had to, and unfortunately just circumstances changed in a very rapid way.
How are you then doing things differently now? I would understand, that growth ambition or becoming a unicorn. I'm sure it's still there at some level. But
I'm very lucky. I came smack in the middle of a recession. People have very low expectations of me as far as that top line goes, right? Everyone talks to me about net revenue. Everyone talks to me about how much money we're making off that GMV. I, being who I am and having been in this ecosystem for this long, I'm still celebrating our GMV wins, but I think that's just me and my team. I don't think the world cares about that anymore, right? And I think right now sustainability is something that's really valued, be it in my business or anyone else's. And so again, we have the luxury today of circumstances allowing for this kind of sanity, right? And I still think if you get a few $100 million in Pakistan next year, we'll go back to those times, right? But I think this lack of capital, and I think seeing and learning, at least for people on ground, that this is not Silicon Valley, right? We are a different ecosystem. We will get to that unicorn. I don't think it'll happen in the way that Silicon Valley has gotten there. It'll happen in a very different way, right? And sustainability matters here. Just something as simple as any startup that I look at, when users are acquired at the wrong price, the moment you fix for that, they're gone. And you're acquiring an entirely new user base, right? Something as basic as that, which I think otherwise we've spent our first few years on every startup learning and trying to then retain those users. They don't have the propensity to pay, they're not staying, right? And so I think there's been a lot of learning across the board. But I think also just capital constraints and a lack of money has taught us all to be far more efficient.
Now, I want to speak about, as an individual customer, please confirm that this is what you're offering at BusCaro, or BusCaro ki app hogi, if somebody downloads app, and if you use BusCaro as your transportation mode, you're telling me it is the cheapest medium.
We cost, so let's look at the entire ecosystem here. We cost 20 to 25% of ride hailing, right? That's the comparison there. When we talk about rickshaws, we are less than a third of that price. When we talk about bikes, depending on the distance and if you're driving yourself, we could be cheaper, we could be more expensive. We are definitely more expensive than public transportation. We could be more expensive than someone using the same vehicle as us and doubling down on the people in the bus, right? If it's a 30-seater bus, I'm only going to put 30 people. There are buses running with 60 people who are falling all over the place in those. If you compare me to that, of course, I'm more expensive. But if we look at any private options that are offered, that you can get some sort of, ride hailing, bus hailing, bike hailing from, we work out to be cheaper.
Right. I think there are so many schools where just for a kid, a car comes every time to pick up. I think there is a lot of benefits that we can gain from shared economy there. I guess parents are scared or are concerned about security, so it's quite exciting what you're doing in terms of security. If parents can be made secure about their children getting picked up in the morning and getting dropped, if we can replace those cars, there's so much of fuel that gets burned.
It's so
there.
entertaining. Every time we launch a new school, we'll see there are like hundreds of cars that are following our vehicles. They just follow us around, right? And that happens for the first 2, 3, 4 days. Then parents are like, okay, this seems fine. My kid's okay, I can back off, right? And then you'll see the next week they tell their friends, and then more parents sign their kids up. And 2 weeks into it, nobody's chasing this bus around. But like day one, any launch, I'm not worried about deploying backups because there's just so many parents I know who will just be right behind us. And that's sort of how it goes. And of course, like parents have to have that comfort. I mean, there was a point where adults weren't even comfortable getting at the back of a car or a bike or a bus, right? We're now talking about people putting their children into vehicles, and that's happening. And I think that's so much progress for this tech ecosystem and the kind of, safety we've made people feel over time.
Mm-hmm. So now maybe we can talk about some of your clients. Who was your first customer, let's say, on a B2B side?
Who was our first customer? Our first customer that I closed was Shakam Industries, which is a textile client in Lahore. And that was the very first client that we got in 2.5 odd years ago, or 2 years ago, in fact. We have since now gotten over 80 clients across KLI. We work with people across sectors. So you'll have schools, you'll have universities, offices of all kinds, and it's a total mix. When we talk about our B2B2C users, it's literally 1/3 children, 1/3 men, 1/3 women,
Wow.
and it's a complete split.
And how does it work for a B2B client when they first call you? What are the questions you ask? If you can talk about those and
Absolutely.
How does it work?
So with B2B clients, the way it generally works is, to be fair, they have other alternatives, right? Unlike a B2C user or an individual, because you can get local transporters who will do this for you, which is historically how this has been done in Pakistan for many, many years. There's a lack of efficiency though in that system. There's generally poor reliability, poor safety standards, lack of compliance, and those are the things that these corporate clients want to solve for. Now, when we first came in, they were all very afraid to work with us. We were these new kids on the block, and transport has worked a certain way for a very, very long time. And I think they didn't think we'd have it in us to be able to pull it off, because there's all kinds of very interesting issues that come up with transportation, right? And I think it was a tough sell then. I think also because the corporate sector has started to think startups come in and we shut down and then we'll just randomly disappear and their employees will be left on the streets, which I assured them is not how we operate. And so I think that we needed to get to a certain threshold until that trust was truly built. So I think the first year we were chasing clients, right? And begging them for business. I think since then, if I speak about the last few months, we haven't gone out to do any sales acquisition. We have so many inbound leads that are consistently coming in that we're barely able to even keep up with that, let alone, go and get new business in. The process is generally either they reach out or we reach out, explain to them what we do, what kind of efficiency we bring in, what, the additional benefits of technology look like. And then we get their user data and we get back to them with pricing. And then we move towards a launch.
Maha, let's talk about the vision now. You've had this traction for a while now. It's good to know that there is inbound traffic also. This is amazing. I think every good business, while there are always challenges, the business has the value proposition. That's why you're getting the inbound traffic. Now, what is the vision for you? I would like you to just leave all the day-to-day troubles that come in. But what's that picture that you've conceived in your mind? Okay, this is what the vision is, and that's what we can do. And these are all the additional areas where we can grow and help.
So my vision is very simple, and it's not going to be as technical as you might like. But I think for me, I want to eventually see a Pakistan where women, girls, people with money, people without money, anyone and their mothers can leave their house as and when they please, get around, not be worried about their safety, and not be worried about how they're going to pay for it. Unfortunately, in Pakistan, that's not a right that humans have. It's certainly not a right that women have. It's not a right that little girls have. And for me, changing that is the vision. I hope to have kids. I hope to raise them in this country, and I hope, their life is not dependent on how their parents have done, right? And they just have options. And I think I want to just create those options for the next generation. I think if I'm able to do that, then all the other things we think of as founders, which is, valuation kya hogi or exit kya hogi and so on and so forth, I think all of that automatically falls into place. But I think for us, the number one thing is creating that opportunity here in Pakistan for people. Because I do believe that the number one roadblock that we have to education and to employment opportunities is how in the world am I going to get there? And that needs to be taken out of the equation, right? And half your population suddenly will have opportunities that they don't. Just looking
Wonderful.
to create that.
And what has been the greatest satisfaction for you on this journey so far?
The greatest satisfaction for me, I think, is just, the other day I was reading an article, and normally when people are doing an article on BusCaro, they interview me, right? And I'm reading the same things that I've said. And this one reporter did most of her interview on random users that she got a hold of, right? Who I've never had any interaction with. And so there was a young girl in college in Islamabad who was talking about how her parents don't worry about her. She now takes evening classes because it's not an issue. She gets to school and back on time, and it costs her less than it used to, and she feels safe. I want us to have millions of girls making that statement about BusCaro. And I think reading that, in a random article, not communicated to me, not coming through the team, just reading what somebody had to say about us as a company and how we made someone feel, I think those are the moments that keep me going every day.
How did you set the values for the company?
So here's what we did. I think we all put ourselves, this is something actually we took a very long time to do. We all got ourselves into a room every day and we all fought with each other on what are the things that we value most, right? And there are a few things that everyone really cared about in that team, including myself. And I think, that's what came in. If you look at our values, one of them is a very strange one. It's deliberate creation, right? What in the world does that really mean? But for us, that I think is a number one value at BusCaro, right? Which is that we want to create deliberately. We want to know where we want to get to and we want to chase that down, right? And we want to, shut out all of the noise outside of that and just be laser focused on achieving that. And I think that's the number one thing for us, right? I think that obsession with our customers, without it, there is no company, right? We're a servicing company. We're here to make people's lives better. And if we can't do that, then what the hell are we good for?
And there is one about doing things wholeheartedly, like all in is the thing. Why did you feel, or your team members, whoever came up with that, you all agreed on it? What's the backstory there? Being all in.
I don't think there's any other way to get anything done.
Right.
I think that you have to be all in and then you have a shot at something.
Right.
Half-heartedly, there's nothing that can be achieved. Look, building a startup is tough. Statistically, most of them fail, right? But you certainly don't have a shot if you're not giving it everything that you have. And so if something doesn't sound right, my team is always allowed to tell me, no, you make no sense, Maha. And it's something I really value.
Right.
But you're not allowed to say, okay, and then be half in.
Got it.
Because we're neither here nor there, right? So whatever it is that we're doing, we have to do that fully. And that's, I think, the only shot we have.
So Maha, if I were to ask you for BusCaro at this point, as at, let's say, January 2025, if I were to ask you about BusCaro in numbers, if you can give us a sense, how many clients do you have? You spoke about that, but maybe just numbers, how many rides you're doing. Maybe if you can talk about, your ambitions for growth this year.
Sure. So our top line this month in terms of sales or GMV is about $450,000. That's what we're doing across the 3 cities. We have consistently been a CM1 positive business. This month we're going to be a CM2 positive business, and so that's a big milestone for us. We have a pretty minimal burn right now. We're on track to break even in the next few months, so we're very excited about that. We've, as of right now, done over 11 million bookings in the time that we've existed. We have 800 odd buses that are on the streets on a daily basis right now, and we move north of 30,000 people a day through us.
Right. Now let's talk about some of those challenges that you may face as entrepreneurs building a business in Pakistan. It's not easy. Everyone say it's a long game, but tell us about what are some of those things that can be done better? What are those things that we can do better, let's say?
As an ecosystem?
As an ecosystem, yeah. Like what will make it easier? Or what are those things that we need to fix? Let's just say like that. What are the things that make you uncomfortable or makes it difficult?
So I think as an individual who's starting something in Pakistan, you have to accept it for its flaws. Right. You have to accept it for all of the problems that you know on day one will show up, and you have to still get on with it, right? That's step one. Now, of course, as an ecosystem, we should still be working to resolve all of those things. But I think for me, the first thing is for founders to accept that misery and the teams with them, right? This is the task at hand, and this is what they've all signed up for. I think as an ecosystem, obviously, startups need money, and there's not a lot of options for capital today, right? Equity rounds there's barely any compared to the number of startups there are. Working capital, there's definitely not many options. I think that the public sector doesn't really have an understanding yet of how startups work and how they need to be supported. I think tax reforms are not built to support startups. On the contrary, I think we get penalized for being tech companies. And I don't think anyone is deliberately doing this. I think we're just a fresh ecosystem, and there's a lot of ideas and learnings that need to be exchanged. I think there's a lot of education that needs to be given across the board, right? Which we haven't done. I don't think banks understand how to work with startups. I think there's just no institution really knows what to do with us at this point, right? And I think steps have to be taken to start bridging that. And I think we have to work on getting access to capital to these startups. I think those are some of the things that I hope to see change this year.
And also for a common audience, why does a business like BusCaro need that venture capital or that money?
Sure. So BusCaro or any other technology company generally needs money early on. One, to innovate, to build technology, to try out different sort of business models to see what's going to stick, to acquire users early on and build that traction. There's a lot of education that needs to be done on the supply side, getting things going there, and all of this is sort of done over time, right? There's a lot of work you need to do across the ecosystem to get a new idea to work. And you can't go on day one to an individual user and tell them to sort of fund that for you, right? And so we have to raise money to get us off the ground, and then ultimately the business is profitable.
And what about round twos? Are you looking to raise capital?
We would be raising capital when we launch our next market. For Pakistan, we are set to break even with what we have.
Awesome. So you're talking about launching a new market. That's amazing.
That's on the horizon eventually, yes.
Congratulations, Maha. So on your personal side, like have you had mentors? Do you discuss your things with mentors? Who do you go for advice and help?
So I think more than advice, I think founders need a safe space to rant, right? I think any of us who's saying we don't doubt ourselves would be lying. We all go through it. We all have moments in the day where we just don't know how we're going to get through this. And I think having that support system of other founders who feel exactly how you feel, I think that's super critical, right? And I think I really rely on, other friends who've gone through this journey or are going through this journey. And I think we all just sort of support each other through that. I think that's super critical.
So what, in your view, is the potential of Pakistan and its people? And what do you think is holding us back? And how can we better apply this potential?
I think what makes startups win more than any other quality is grit. And I think Pakistanis are the grittiest people that I have met in my life, right? We are born to be building startups. We are born to be working at startups. I think these are the kind of people you need all over the world to solve that problem. I think there's no shortage of talent. We've obviously seen brain drain in the last couple of years, which is unfortunate. But again, I think as opportunities get better, people will come back. But I think, I have no doubts about the kind of talent we have, especially to build this ecosystem. I do think over time we need to create more support, whether that's, at schools, that's at colleges, that's a general support on entrepreneurship. Right. I think if there's one thing that's going to change the fate of this nation, it's more entrepreneurs. And I don't just mean startups, right? I mean entrepreneurs of any kind. And I think we're starting to see a trend where there's more of that now. And I think that needs to continue to grow, and we'll be in a very different position.
Ma, one thing that it comes in talks, and that is that we find it difficult as companies, as Pakistanis. We can talk about Pakistan. Difficult to collaborate. I mean, there are certain shared problems that we have, but in order for them to be resolved, it needs a shared approach. Somehow we're unable to do that, and third parties can see that as an outside-in view. Do you believe that there are things holding us back because of our own incapacities?
I think that we're generally very protective of the information that we have, right? As an ecosystem, I feel we don't share enough. I feel everybody feels this need to be brave, though I define bravery differently. And I think nobody wants to show their weaknesses. And what ends up happening is I think there's a lot of support that is so easily available that's just not utilized, right? I think founders are dealing with the same challenges. I've come to realize founders who are not in mobility have the same problems that I do. We cry about the same things. But I think there's just not many people who share learnings, who share their mistakes, who share that they're struggling, they need help. And I think as an ecosystem, we need to all really step up to, help one another out. I think we need to also normalize failure. I think we need to normalize companies going through a bad period. And I think in Pakistan, that's just not something that we've really done. And again, we're all new and we're all learning.
We're all learning.
But I think there's so many people who've now done so much great work in this ecosystem, good, bad, and ugly, that there's so much to learn from. I think we started openly just engaging on that, which I hope we see more of.
Because there's a certain level of music that comes when good things are happening, boosts the morale. I think we experienced that music in Pakistan when things were happening. People were taking the risk. People from outside were moving in. The music was on. What will it take for the music to go back on? And whose responsibility is that in your thing? Like, what will it take for it to be back?
I think it's gonna take one startup that becomes a big success, right? And everything will change. If we look back to a few years ago, Careem took off in Pakistan, right? And Careem got acquired by Uber. People who worked at Careem got a little bit of money out of it, got some status out of it. And the next day, every kid on the block wanted to go work for a startup because it was the cool thing to do. Now, startups have become uncool immediately after Airlift and Swivel, I would say, shut down. And so today we're not cool. I think there's going to be one big hit. And, this is going to be a cool thing for people to do again. And I don't think we're that much further away from it. I don't think it's really anyone's responsibility to create that music. I think it's just going to organically happen because I think there are people today who are building great businesses. There will be good news around them. And I think that's going to change the morale for other entrepreneurs, aspiring ones, people starting off their careers. And that's going to change.
Right. Just one thing that came to my mind, because I think you're also doing amazing work when there is formal, organized. Of course, you're doing amazing work, but specifically, Maha, maybe we can also talk about the value adds that you and your team have brought into this market around BusCaro? Because security definitely is a big aspect.
So let me talk about safety first, right? When we talk about safety, there's multiple aspects there. There are operational things, like are these vehicles inspected, which otherwise weren't? Are these drivers trained? Have we run a background check on them? Are they safe people? Are the passengers sitting in individual seats? Because sexual harassment is a huge problem in high capacity vehicles in Pakistan, right? And can we stop that from happening? Can we shorten the walking distance to this vehicle for these individuals so they're safe even before they get on a BusCaro vehicle, right? From a technology perspective, what is there, and operationally what is there? And I think there's, a lot that goes into that. But the number one thing that tech does is without it, there is no way to efficiently utilize vehicles, right? You have a driver who's earning less, you have a customer who's paying more, your asset utilization is poor, there's this half empty bus running around, and people are overpaying / under earning as a result of it, and that's what technology solves for, right? Beyond that, of course, there's multiple other layers of your safety, your security, your panic buttons in place. When we talk about B2B clients and we talk about this ecosystem overall, one of the biggest issues that they face with non-technology players is that there's no way for them to know if their bill is correct or not, right? And so on variable, you can't prove what the fuel was. You can't really prove what distances they traveled. And they're overcharged, right? And that's something that we came in and said, okay, we need to fix for. We need to give people financial visibility. What we learned is on day one, when we gave a quotation, we'd be more expensive. And at the end of the month, we worked out to be cheaper because I was not overcharging anybody on anything else, right? We used tech to work on fuel savings, on better route optimizations, and so on and so forth. And so I think, like I said, directly or indirectly, affordability and safety, everything we do is, surrounding that. Our passion is to get into electric vehicles and have an even larger impact on climate, which to a great degree we already do just through getting people off bikes and cars and putting them into larger buses. But I think electrifying vehicles is something that BusCaro is really hopeful to be able to do in the near future.
Please talk more about this, because when we look at some of the regulations that will come around exporters in terms of them upgrading their ESG standards, and so many of their labor force, they come through maybe diesel buses or petrol buses. Can you frame that as a problem going forward, and how maybe thus BusCaro can
First, just look at this historically. I've been trying to work on electric vehicles since, I think, 2018, 2019. Now, it's never been something that I was capable of doing, or most players are able to do, because the unit economics just don't make sense. You as an individual will not pay me more money for traveling in an electric vehicle. However, you as a corporate will, right? And so what is now starting to change is one, that unit economics differential is not as bad as it used to be, which helps a little bit. But also I think B2B clients, especially people who are exporters, they have pressure on them to reduce carbon emissions, right? And so they're willing to sort of take that on. The challenge for us is, where do you get these vehicles from, right? And getting them in is a whole different nightmare. Now, we don't own vehicles as a business model, we rent them. There is nobody I can rent electric vehicles from today. And so now we're working with potential investors, making a business case, saying, okay, each bus you bring me in, this is how you'll earn on it, this is how we'll pay that off. And that's sort of the model that we're trying to go with, but it's a long, painful process, right? We also don't have the subsidies in place that have existed in every other market that's tried to electrify vehicles. And so the return on that investment, be it for us, be it for an investor, be it for anyone, it just doesn't commercially make sense in the way that it should. And I think that's something that we're all struggling with and trying to solve for. There is some work, however, being done on this. I think the next time you and I speak, I'll have more exciting updates. And I think we're going to be able to change this a little bit.
So Maha, about your competition, ये लोग तो वो हैं जो buses अपनी चलाते हैं, इंडिविजुअल ओनर, उनके पास बस है, कंपनी से कॉन्ट्रैक्ट मिला हुआ है, सो इनफॉर्मल सेक्टर होगा, ये ऑर्गेनाइज भी नहीं होंगे. यू ऑन द अदर हैंड इज अ फॉर्मल प्लेयर. यू वुड सेंड योर कंपनी एन इनवॉइस, उस पर आपको टैक्स भी देना होता होगा. सो हाउ डू यू कम्पीट with these people?
You've just woken up the beast in me. Look, there's bigger problems than that. Let's assume they do pay taxes. Even if they do pay taxes, पहले उनका जो है, the way their taxes work is much more beneficial than the way ours work. So, for instance, there's a 16% tax, which is then fully refunded to these corporates. With tech companies, there's a 4 or 5% tax, but they don't get that back, right? Withholding tax जो होता है वो जब काटा जाता है, so in our case, they are forced to cut that on the GMV value. My revenue is a fraction of that GMV value, whereas where this transporter, even if somebody's cutting that off, it's actually on their revenue. In my case, I'm essentially working as a marketplace, and so when you cut my taxes on my GMV, you're not taxing me 4%, you're taxing me 40-50% because my entire revenue is going to be 10% of that invoice, right? And there's just no way around this as of today, right? This is the way that ride-hailing taxes are structured. It was built for Kareem, which is a completely different business. The way taxation works for technology companies, again, doesn't take in any way into account what their on-ground competition in the offline sector is doing. And so taxation is actually the number one thing that comes up in terms of our pricing versus others' pricing, right? And the number one fight that clients have with us is not on what my invoice amount is, but on the taxation, because that's affecting them, right? Just simply put, there's an additional 5% tax that they have to pay on anything that I'm billing to them versus someone else billing them the exact same amount.
So, what's the backstory with this Meet the Draper series? Like, what was the process like, and how many people were involved? And congratulations, because I believe you are the winner.
Thank you. I'm the winner for Pakistan. Right. So Meet the Drapers has, I think, done 7 seasons. They're shooting their 8th season. This is Tim Draper's show. Where you have startups from all over the world participating, and for the first time Pakistan was included in that list this year. I think we had about 300 plus startups that applied. I think there was like 180 odd then that were selected, and there was some form of due diligence done on. Then there were 50 and 25 and 10 and so on and so forth, and eventually they selected 3. We were one of them, Lam was the other, and then there was Michael. Right. And at Park Launch, the unconference this year, they had like a live recording of the show. We won the episode. Very excited that we won, but I think more than anything, it was just great to have our ecosystem be involved. I think the highlight for me was they had a wild card entry, and so it wasn't a typical name you'll think of from this ecosystem. And we had Re-Up Cycle that entered, and I was certain he was going to win that day, right? And that's the quality of founders that we have in this country, whether we know it or not. And so I think it was a truly amazing experience. These are great founders. They're building great companies. But I think from an impact perspective, what BusCaro is doing, I think that's something that probably resonated with the judges. I think Tim also, outside of that, generally is a fan of the mobility space. He's previously invested in mobility companies. So I think there's also a general interest in the type of work we do. I think from a market sizing perspective, and if we talk specifically about Pakistan, I think mobility is as big as it gets. I do think we're the right team solving this problem. So I think we rightfully won.
Congratulations, Maha, and thank you so much. I hope we get to do this again, and it's been a pleasure talking to you, learning about BusCaro, and we wish you the best, and thank you so much again.
Thank you for your time, Ansar.